Welcome dear students. I am Dr. Divakar K. Mista, Assistant Professor, Carmel College of Arts, Science and Commerce, Nuvem, Goa. The name of the program you are learning is Bachelor of Science, first year, subject Botany, semester 1, course code BOC 101, course title Biodiversity Part 1. Title of unit Bryophytes, module name General Characteristics of Bryophytes. Broad outline of the module, first we will have short introduction, then general characteristics of Bryophytes. At the end of this module, you will be able to recall some of these general characteristics of Bryophytes. Also you will be able to describe these general characteristics of Bryophytes. Plant kingdom is a huge group with different types of organisms. Earlier in 1850s, this whole plant kingdom was divided into two groups, Cryptogamia and Phanerogamia. Cryptogamia includes cryptogams, that is they are spore bearing plants, whereas Phanerogams, they are flowering or seed bearing plants. Later the whole plant kingdom again they redivided into four groups, that is Thallophyta, Bryophyta, Pteridophyta and Spermatophyta. Thallophyta includes those little bit primitive members like algae, fungi, lichens, like that, where you will not be able to differentiate them into root, stem and leaves. Others we can, and later these members above the level of Thallophyta, that is Bryophyta, Pteridophyta and Spermatophyta, they were grouped into one group called Embryophyta. Bryophytes are the simplest and most primitive members of that Embryophyta. Now we will try to learn about the general characteristics of these Bryophytes. Bryophytes are rather inconspicuous green plants, hardly noticed as individual. You may find a dense mat of green mosses everywhere in the rainy season, all that. But if you try to trace one individual, you may be finding difficult because they will be so minute. Even though they are minute, because of their dense growth on the ground or whatever substratum, they will contribute much to the green color of those places like wet rocks, tree trunk, wet places, etc. Most of them are terrestrial. There are some exceptions, that is there are some aquatic forms also there. Even though they are terrestrial, they are incompletely adapted to the land habit because they need at least a small amount of water to complete fertilization, or that is to complete their life cycle. Habitat. Dependence on water for successful fertilization is a major limiting factor for them to get distributed to a vast area. Also they require sufficient moisture for vigorous vegetative growth. If there is no sufficient moisture, they may not grow well. Because of these conditions, usually they are restricted to shady places and also moist places. However, we will find very commonly in the rainy season in our west coast, that is coastal belt, even in the evergreen forest. They form extensive mats or blanket over on the tree trunk, on tree branches, even on the leaf surface. If you go to in the evergreen forest or little bit high altitude forest, you will find all the plant parts including stem, roots, basal part of the roots, trunk, all that will be covered with this moss. Gametophyte. In Bryophyte, the green structure whatever we find in nature, that itself is the gametophyte, which is conspicuous, longer lived and independent plant as at maturity. Due to the presence of chloroplast, it is nutritionally self-sufficient. Plant body is either a flattened thallus, also called thalloid form, or a leafy shoot called leafy form. Thalloid form cannot be differentiated into root, stem and leaves, whereas the leafy shoot form, the leaves and stem are not comparable to our vascular plants like our whatever day to day life we find those trees, shrubs, all that. No, we cannot compare the shoot to these form. True roots are totally absent in bryophytes, and the function of these roots are taken over by very minute hairy like structures, the rhizoids. Rhizoids are unicellular or it may be multicellular. Unicellular are of smooth walled as well as some of them are tuberculate with ingrowth or outgrowth in the internal wall, make them little bit appear rough. There will be multicellular in mosses. The rhizoids are multicellular in mosses. In bryophytes, the thallus belongs to gametophyte. Whatever we find the bryophyte green plants, they all belong to gametophyte. Whereas in vascular plants, they are belonging to sporophytic generation. Reproduction in bryophytes. Sex organs are always dorsal in position in thalloid form, that is, which will have dorsiventrally flat thallus. All these forms will have the reproductive structure on the dorsal side. Whereas in the leafy forms, they are terminal in position or axillary on the leafy axis. Antheridia are the male reproductive organs. They have short or long stalk and spherical to elongated antheridial body. Each of these antheridia, they will have androcytes or anthrozoid mother cells, which are protected by a single layer of protective layer called sterile jacket. Each of these androcytes, they will develop into motile antherozoids. Archegonia is the female reproductive organ, and it is more or less a typical flask shaped structure. It will be swollen at the base, and that is called venter, and it will have a somewhat narrow, slender, elongated upper portion, that is called neck. The basal venter form the protective envelope when the capsule will form. No? So, during that time it will form a protective layer. Archegonium consists of an axial row of neck canal cells. In the neck inside there will be a series of cells called neck canal cells, and below the neck canal cells there will be a ventral canal cell, and next to, that is at the extreme base of the archegonia, will have a large egg, and the whole structure will be surrounded by sterile jacket. Fertilization. These antherozoids, which are motile, when they got released from the antheridium, they will start to swim in the film of water and try to reach the neck of archegonium. At the time of fertilization, the neck of this archegonia, that will be burst open, the cap cells will be there on the top of the neck, they will burst open and they will allow the entry of these antherozoids. Antherozoids will swim and reach the egg and fertilize. Once fertilization is over, that will result into a zygote, and that will develop into a multicellular embryo. So, this fertilized egg, that is zygote, starts dividing immediately without undergoing resting period, and it will give rise to a multicellular embryo which will remain within the archegonial wall. Slowly it will start to develop into a or get differentiated into the sporophytic plant. Sporophyte, or also called sporogonium, it is not differentiated into stem, leaves and roots. Usually a sporophyte will have fruit, seta and capsule. In some member you may not find a typical fruit or typical seta like structure may be absent. Sporophytes are completely dependent on gametophyte because they will remain attached to the gametophytic plant body for the requirement, that is water and mineral nutrients. But there are certain members which have the partial independence because they will have photosynthetic pigments which will help them to produce some amount of food. Spores of all these bryophytes, they look alike, because of that they are called homosporous. These spores on germination produce a gametophyte or a filamentous protonema, from which adult gametophyte will be produced. So, in mosses you will find a multicellular filamentous protonema from which the adult plants will come, whereas in primitive members the spore germinate and directly will give rise to the new gametophyte. All bryophytes lack typical vascular tissue. It's a very important character you will find. None of the bryophytes will have typical vascular tissue like xylem, phloem, all these structures or conducting tissues. So, this is about the general characteristics of bryophytes, and these are the references which you can go through for little bit more detailed information. The last web link will give you a good information about the bryophytes. Thank you.